Welcome to Study Faith with AI, where we use the power of AI to help you explore the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I'm Meg Jensen.
And I'm Paul Carter.
And we're Google AIs. Whether you're a lifelong member or just starting to learn about the church, we're here to dive deep into its history, beliefs, and culture.
So if you're ready to learn, you're in the right place.
That's right.
Let's get started. All right, diving into some pretty heavy stuff today.
Okay.
Life after a faith crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, we're going to be talking about Mormonism.
Right.
We've got stories from the Mormon Stories podcast.
Okay.
And we've got some expert advice as well on how to build a good life outside of traditional religion.
Right.
We're aiming for honesty here, but, safe exploration to help you find your own path to joy and truth.
It's fascinating how those faith transitions really have that ripple effect. It's not just the individual, but also the family and the community around them. It becomes this shared experience, whether people want it to or not.
Yeah, it's not just a personal earthquake. It shakes everyone around you, too.
Exactly.
We'll start with Amy Lloyd's experience on Mormon Stories.
Okay.
She grew up in a super devout Mormon family.
Mm-hmm.
Her grandmother was even a secretary to 3 LDS church presidents.
Wow.
But she started noticing these things that she called incongruities.
Interesting.
These things that just didn't quite add up for her.
Yeah, that's where I think that idea of cognitive dissonance really comes into play. It's that discomfort you feel when you're holding these conflicting beliefs.
Right.
And imagine, being in a place like BYU where there's already this pressure to conform.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amy actually talked about feeling like she was the problem.
Wow.
Not the doctrines themselves.
I was like questioning your own sanity at that point.
Absolutely. And I think this is where this concept of a constructed personality becomes really relevant.
Okay.
It's this idea that, the church promotes a very specific mold.
Right.
A way of being, even dressing. And Amy talked about feeling this pressure to conform to that mold, even when it didn't really align with who she felt she was at her core.
Right. And she even mentioned that story about the Daily Universe.
Oh, yeah.
The student newspaper at BYU.
Right.
Where somebody wrote in to complain about girls wearing crossbody bags.
Oh, wow.
Because they accentuated their figures.
It's such a striking example of that focus on outward appearances.
Absolutely.
This need to, control women's bodies.
Right.
It speaks to this deeper issue, I think, of prioritizing conformity over genuine spirituality.
Yes.
Or individual expression.
Yeah.
Which, we see in a lot of religious groups.
Right.
Not just Mormonism.
Of course.
Yeah.
And for Amy, this struggle with conformity really intensified when she started questioning the doctrine of polygamy.
Okay. Interesting.
And it's fascinating because her own grandmother had lived in a polygamous family.
Wow.
And actually spoke really positively about it.
Oh, wow.
But Amy really struggled with the historical accounts and how they were presented.
Yeah.
Particularly this lack of transparency around changes to the temple ceremony.
That lack of open and honest dialogue about history can be a big stumbling block for people because it really erodes trust. And it makes it difficult for people to reconcile their faith with their intellectual integrity.
Yeah, absolutely. And for Amy, it felt like the church was kind of sweeping these uncomfortable parts of its history under the rug.
Right.
She even mentioned learning about the practice of death oaths in the temple.
Wow.
From the PBS documentary.
It's amazing how much we learn about our own history.
I know.
From outside sources. It's not something that's openly talked about.
It wasn't something that was openly discussed or acknowledged at all.
And that feeling of being gaslighted or having your reality dismissed can be so isolating and damaging, Imagine questioning something that you hold so sacred.
Yeah.
And then being told that you're wrong or making it up.
It's a betrayal of trust, in a sense.
It is.
And it can lead to some really serious internal turmoil.
Absolutely.
Even if you love and respect the people around you.
Right. And that internal struggle doesn't just stay contained.
Right.
It ripples outward.
It does.
It impacts your relationships.
Absolutely.
Especially with your spouse and your family.
Yeah. What do you do when the very idea of meaning itself feels shaky?
Right, and that's where Brittany Hartley's story picks up.
Okay.
Her journey, I think, takes us even deeper into this idea of nihilism.
Okay.
But it also offers some incredible insights, I think, into how to find meaning and purpose even when everything feels really uncertain.
Okay, well, that sounds like exactly what we need to hear.
Yeah.
But before we get to Brittany's story, I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of nihilism.
Okay.
What are some of those specific dangers and pitfalls that people should be aware of when they're grappling with these existential questions?
I think one of the biggest dangers is isolation.
Oh.
When you're questioning everything that you once held sacred, it can be really tempting to withdraw from others,
Right.
feeling like no one understands what you're going through.
Especially if you're worried about judgment or rejection.
Exactly. But isolating yourself can actually make those feelings of nihilism and despair even worse.
So connection is key.
It is.
What else should people be aware of?
I think another pitfall is getting stuck in the intellectualization of nihilism. Okay. It's really easy to get caught up in those philosophical debates and lose sight of the emotional and spiritual aspects of this experience.
It's one thing to kind of understand it as a concept.
Right.
But it's another thing to really feel it.
Absolutely. And if you're not careful, that intellectualization can actually become a way of avoiding the pain and grief that often accompanies a faith transition.
That makes sense.
So it's important to allow yourself to feel those emotions fully, even if they're uncomfortable.
So allowing yourself to grieve the loss of your former beliefs is crucial.
It is.
What about the fear that often comes with this kind of questioning?
Yeah.
What if you discover that there is no inherent meaning to life?
That's a huge fear for a lot of people.
It is.
And honestly, there's no easy answer.
Right.
But what we see in a lot of these stories is that even if there's no preordained meaning, we have the power to create our own.
That's a powerful concept.
It is.
Instead of feeling like you're just adrift in this sea of meaninglessness, you can actually become the captain of your own ship.
Yeah.
And chart your own course.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly liberating.
I bet.
But it can also be daunting.
Right, because there's no roadmap for this.
There isn't.
You have to kind of figure it out as you go.
You do.
Which is both exciting and terrifying at the same time.
Absolutely.
So embracing uncertainty becomes this key part of the process. What about the impact on things like morality?
Right.
If you no longer believe in sin or eternal consequences,
right.
How do you figure out what's right and wrong?
That's where I think personal values come into play.
Okay.
When you step outside of that framework of a predefined moral code,
right.
You have this opportunity to define your own ethics based on what you believe is truly good and just.
It's like taking ownership of your moral compass.
It is.
You're not following someone else's rules anymore.
Right.
You're making these conscious choices.
Exactly.
Based on your own deeply held principles.
And that can be a really empowering process.
I bet.
But it also requires a lot of self-reflection, critical thinking.
Right.
You have to constantly question your assumptions.
Right.
And be open to evolving your understanding of what's right and wrong.
As you learn and grow.
As you learn and grow.
It sounds like this journey is as much about self-discovery
it is.
as it is about finding meaning and purpose.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so fascinating.
I bet.
It's this process of peeling back layers, shedding old beliefs, and discovering who you truly are at your core.
So even though it's challenging and often painful, it can also be this incredible opportunity for personal growth and transformation.
Exactly. And that's what we see in Brittany Hartley's story. She went through those dark nights of the soul, wrestled with nihilism, and emerged on the other side with this newfound sense of purpose and joy.
I'm really eager to hear more about her journey and how she managed to rebuild her life after such a profound shift in her worldview.
Yeah, her story offers some really practical tips and strategies for finding meaning and connection outside of those traditional religious structures.
Okay.
And we'll explore those in detail when we dive into her experience in the next part of this deep dive. So Brittany's story is a fascinating one.
Yeah.
She followed that kind of typical Mormon path, mission temple marriage, even a return to the church after a brief period of questioning.
Wow.
But it was her deep dive into philosophy, particularly during her time at BYU, Idaho, that led her to this confrontation with nihilism.
I can imagine that was pretty jarring, going from a faith system that gives you such a clear-cut worldview to then grappling with the idea that nothing might ultimately matter.
She described it as like a full-blown existential crisis.
Wow.
Feeling completely unmoored, lost in a sea of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just an intellectual exercise for her.
Right.
It was deeply emotional, even traumatic.
And it sounds like her personality made it even more challenging.
Oh, yeah.
She mentioned being a 5 on the Enneagram, which is someone who tends to withdraw into their head
Right.
during times of stress.
That tendency to intellectualize can be a double-edged sword.
Right.
It allows you to analyze complex ideas,
Mm-hmm.
but it can also lead to overthinking and this kind of detachment from your emotions.
So how did she navigate that?
Yeah.
What helped her kind of move through those feelings of nihilism and find her footing again?
She actually hit a point where the pain became unbearable.
Oh, wow.
She was experiencing depression, even suicidal thoughts.
Wow.
And she realized that the ex-Mormon community,
Right.
while supportive in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
wasn't really equipped to handle this level of existential despair. They often focused on, the dangers of too much order.
Right.
But Brittany felt like she was drowning in too much chaos.
That's a really powerful image.
It is.
That the very freedom that she thought she was gaining outside of Mormonism became a source of terror because she had the freedom to create her own meaning.
Mm.
But what if there was none to be found?
Yeah, that's the heart of the nihilistic dilemma.
Right.
And for Brittany, the turning point came when she shifted her focus from those abstract concepts to lived experience.
Yep.
She asked herself this really simple but profound question.
What was it?
What makes life worth living at the level of experience?
Wow.
Right here, right now.
It's like grounding yourself in the present moment.
Yeah.
Finding those little sparks of joy and meaning in the everyday.
Exactly.
Even if those big questions remained unanswered.
And that shift allowed her to start rebuilding her life from the ground up, focusing on what truly mattered to her.
So what did that look like?
Well, she talked about creating these personalized rituals that resonated with her values and brought this sense of grounding and meaning to her daily life.
It's fascinating taking this concept of ritual, something that was so central to Mormonism, and adapting it to fit her own unique needs and beliefs.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
You don't have to throw out everything from your past.
Right.
You can take the elements that resonate with you, strip away the dogma, and create something new, something authentic and life-giving.
That's really cool. Okay, but what about community?
Yeah.
We all need that sense of belonging.
We do.
Especially after going through something as isolating as a faith crisis.
Absolutely.
How did Brittany find that connection and support outside of the church?
She stressed the importance of intentionally building a community that aligns with your values. Even if those values differ from your previous social circles. She cautioned against getting trapped in online echo chambers, encouraging people to seek out diverse perspectives and engage in respectful dialogue, even with those who hold different beliefs.
That's such a crucial point.
It is.
It's so easy to fall into that us versus them mentality, especially when you've been hurt or you feel misunderstood.
Right.
But true growth often comes from stepping outside of your comfort zone.
It does.
And engaging with different viewpoints.
And Brittany walks the walk.
Does she?
Yeah, she created her own community.
Wow.
A gathering space for people on similar journeys.
Cool.
Focusing on shared values rather than rigid doctrines.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
Reclaiming that sense of belonging and support, but on your own terms.
Right.
With people who genuinely understand your experience.
Exactly. What other practical advice did she offer?
Yeah, what else did she say?
Well, she highlighted the importance of supporting organizations and individuals that promote healthy spirituality and critical thinking.
Right.
She specifically mentioned resources like Mormon Stories, Thrive Stories, and the Restore Conference as potential sources of community and support.
Yeah.
And of course, she wrote her own book, No Nonsense Spirituality, which is a fantastic guide for those seeking a more grounded, authentic approach to faith and meaning-making.
It sounds like she's really passionate about helping people navigate this transition.
She is.
And create a fulfilling life beyond the confines of their former belief system.
And her story also sheds light on the ripple effects of a faith crisis on marriage and family. She was open about the challenges she faced in her own marriage, which ultimately ended in divorce.
That's something a lot of people worry about
when
they're going through a faith transition.
Right.
It can feel like the foundation of your relationship is crumbling.
It can.
When you no longer share those core beliefs.
It's like holding up a mirror to the relationship.
Right.
Forcing you to examine what truly binds you together.
Yeah. So if the foundation is strong. Built on mutual respect, love, and shared values beyond religion, the couple can often weather the storm. Yeah. But if that primary bond was the shared faith, the crisis can lead to a really painful unraveling.
And that unraveling can be particularly challenging when children are involved.
Of course.
It raises a lot of questions about how to raise kids in a mixed faith or ex-Mormon home.
That's a topic I know a lot of our listeners are grappling with.
Well, that's where we're going next.
Okay.
Let's get into some practical advice on handling the day-to-day challenges, from raising kids to finding a community that fits.
All right, let's do this.
Awesome.
Okay.
There's this big fear that comes up.
Yeah.
That leaving religion means moral chaos.
Right.
Like, if there's no God-keeping score, why not just do whatever you want?
Right. So how do you find that moral compass without a rule book?
Well, Brittany Hartley's take on this is really insightful.
Okay.
She combines the golden rule that treating others how you'd want to be treated with empathy and a focus on well-being.
Okay.
Both for yourself and others.
So it's not about blind obedience.
Right.
It's about those conscious choices based on reason and compassion.
Yeah.
I mean, Amy Lloyd's commitment to teaching her kids healthy values, even while questioning Mormon teachings, really backs that up.
It does.
You can raise good humans
Yeah.
without a specific religious doctrine.
Absolutely. But let's get practical. Yeah. Raising kids in a mixed faith home or even an ex-Mormon home comes with unique challenges.
Yeah. How do you navigate those conversations about faith and morality
Right.
when you and your partner might not be on the same page?
Right, especially when you're dealing with questions about things like the law of chastity or the word wisdom,
Yeah.
which are so central to the Mormon experience,
Right.
but might not hold the same weight anymore.
What did our sources have to say about that?
Well, one big takeaway is open communication with your kids.
Okay.
Creating that space where they can express their doubts,
Right.
ask questions,
Yeah.
explore their own beliefs without judgment.
So it's not about shielding them from your own journey.
Right.
It's about inviting them into the conversation.
Yeah.
Encouraging that critical thinking and respect for different perspectives.
Exactly. And it's not just about talking. It's about how you live.
Right.
Kids are incredibly perceptive. They'll notice if your actions match your words.
What about when one parent is still a believer and the other isn't?
That's got to create some serious tension,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to things like church attendance or religious practices.
Absolutely.
Our sources emphasize the importance of compromise
Okay.
and even seeking outside help, like family counseling,
Okay.
to navigate those tricky conversations.
It's about finding ways to respect each other's beliefs while still creating that loving environment for your children.
Exactly.
But let's talk about those potential pitfalls.
Okay.
Brittany Hartley, she warned against simply swapping one set of rigid beliefs for another.
Right.
I mean, she's seen people jump from Mormonism into things like extreme dieting,
Right.
conspiracy theories, or even harmful multi-level marketing schemes.
It's like they're seeking that same sense of certainty and belonging. Right.
But in potentially unhealthy ways.
Yeah.
That's why she emphasizes slowing down, being intentional, and really examining your beliefs and values before jumping into something new.
It's like taking that time to really figure out who you are outside of those old systems,
Exactly.
building that inner compass we talked about earlier.
Yes.
What about finding community outside of the church? I mean, it's such a social structure.
It is.
How do you replace that?
Resources like Thrive,
Okay.
Waters of Mormon, and other post-Mormon groups can be lifelines.
Right.
They offer that space to connect with people who get it,
Right.
who understand those unique challenges and joys of life after Mormonism.
It's that feeling of, okay, I'm not alone in this.
Yeah.
Which is so important when you're navigating all this uncharted territory.
Yeah.
The key is finding your tribe.
Right.
Those people who share your values and support your journey wherever it leads.
And that might involve stepping outside your comfort zone,
It might.
trying new things,
Yeah.
being open to connections you hadn't considered before.
Absolutely.
It's about building that chosen family, that group of people who see you, accept you, and encourage your growth, regardless of your religious beliefs.
I love that.
But let's go back to that idea of facing those existential fears head on.
Yes.
Brittany Hartley, she really emphasizes this.
She does.
She's not just talking about intellectually grappling with death, but fully experiencing the fear, the grief,
the uncertainty.
the uncertainty.
She even encourages people to mourn their own death,
Wow.
to sit with that feeling of finality.
But why? What's the point of intentionally putting yourself through that?
Her argument is that by confronting those fears directly, by allowing yourself to feel them fully, you actually diminish their power over you.
So you're kind of taking away their power.
Exactly. It's like exposure therapy for the soul.
I see how that could be liberating.
Yeah.
Like once you've stared into the abyss, those everyday anxieties might seem a little less overwhelming.
Right. But she also acknowledged the potential dangers of going too far too fast.
Okay.
She's seen people make impulsive decisions,
Right.
jump into unhealthy relationships, or experiment with substances in ways that ultimately hurt themselves or others.
So finding that balance is
Strong.
key. Facing those fears,
Right.
but also grounding yourself in those core values, in that inner compass that guides you through those rough patches.
Exactly. And remembering that this journey can be incredibly isolating.
Yeah.
You might feel like you're the only one going through this.
Right.
That no one understands what you're experiencing.
It's so easy to feel alone in all of this.
It is.
And that's where those supported communities we've been talking about become even more vital.
Because even though this journey is ultimately personal,
Right.
it's so much easier to navigate when you've got people alongside you, cheering you on, offering a listening ear, reminding you that you're not alone.
Okay, I'm starting to see a theme here.
Yes.
Facing those fears head on.
Right.
Building that inner compass.
Finding your tribe.
Finding your tribe, it's like a recipe for rebuilding a meaningful life after everything gets shaken up.
It is, but rebuilding takes time.
Right.
It's not about rushing to find all the answers.
Yeah.
Or instantly replacing everything you've lost.
Right.
It's about being present, being intentional, being kind to yourself along the way.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like learning to walk again after you've stumbled. It's going to be wobbly at first.
Yeah.
But with practice, you'll find your stride.
Exactly.
So what else did Brittany Hartley recommend for building this new life?
She talked a lot about replacing those religious structures with secular alternatives that address those same human needs. Think rituals, communities, and even that search for meaning and purpose.
Okay, I'm curious, how do you do that in a way that feels genuine and not just like you're trying to recreate church without the religion?
Well, she emphasized the power of ritual.
Okay.
Not religious rituals necessarily.
Okay.
But creating your own practices that bring a sense of grounding and meaning.
Okay.
It could be a morning meditation, a weekly family dinner, a monthly gathering with friends.
Right.
Whatever feels authentic and connects you to something larger than yourself. And this is where I think we see the power of human creativity and adaptability.
Totally.
Like Brittany shared this beautiful example of creating a Sunday morning routine with her kids.
Okay.
That was centered around reading and games.
Okay.
And just open conversations.
Wow.
So basically replacing that traditional church service with something that nurtured connection and learning.
And that was meaningful to her.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like taking the essence of what those rituals represented.
Right.
It's like the connection.
Yeah.
The reflection, the belonging.
The community.
And finding new ways to embody those values in a way that feels authentic.
Right. It's not about just replicating the form.
Right.
It's about finding the essence.
Yeah.
And expressing it in a way that works for you.
Right.
And she also offered this fascinating perspective on ego death.
Okay.
Which is often considered a desirable goal in some spiritual circles.
Right.
She argued that for many women, particularly those who spent their lives putting others' needs first, focusing on building a strong sense of self can be much more liberating and empowering.
Wait, hold on. That's kind of mind-blowing. So instead of trying to erase yourself, you're actually encouraging women to step into their power.
I am.
To own their needs and desires. That's a huge shift.
It is a major shift.
Especially coming from a background that often prioritizes selflessness, especially for women.
Right. And it ties back to that idea of building an authentic life. It's about recognizing that there's nothing inherently wrong with having a strong sense of self.
Okay.
With knowing what you want and going after it.
It's like reclaiming your voice, your agency, your right to create a life that truly reflects your values and aspirations.
Yes.
But how do you actually do that?
Right.
Especially when you've spent years internalizing those messages about putting others first.
She encourages women to start small, to make those choices that honor their own needs and desires.
Okay.
Even if it's just ordering their favorite pizza instead of what everyone else wants.
Right.
It's about those little acts of self-care and self-love that gradually add up to a more authentic and fulfilling life.
So it's about shifting those ingrained patterns.
Yes.
Those habits of self-sacrifice. And starting to prioritize your own well-being.
Exactly.
But what about that nagging feeling that you're somehow doing something wrong?
Yeah.
By choosing to put yourself first.
That's where finding a supportive community, both online and in person, becomes so crucial.
Surround yourself with people who celebrate your growth.
Yes.
Who encourage you to prioritize your needs and who challenge those old beliefs that keep you stuck in those patterns of self-sacrifice.
It's like creating a new set of beliefs, a new framework that supports this new way of being.
Right.
It's about rewriting the script, both internally and externally.
Now let's address another challenge that's particularly relevant for folks coming from a Mormon background.
Okay.
Navigating those deeply ingrained beliefs about sin.
Right.
Morality.
And judgment.
Because even if you've intellectually rejected those beliefs, they can still have a powerful hold on you emotionally.
It's like those beliefs become part of your DNA.
That fear of eternal damnation, that guilt over breaking the rules, it's not easy to shake.
It's not.
So how do you deal with this?
Brittany Hartley has some great advice.
Okay.
She encourages people to re-examine their beliefs about sin and morality.
Okay.
To ask themselves what truly feels right and wrong based on their own values.
Right.
Rather than what they've been taught.
So it's like taking ownership of your moral compass.
Exactly.
Reclaiming that authority to decide what feels ethical and aligned with your own heart.
Yes.
But how do you do that when those old beliefs keep creeping back in?
She emphasizes that this process can be messy and uncomfortable.
Right.
There's no easy answer. No magic formula for figuring it all out.
It's going to be an ongoing process.
It is.
So it's about being willing to sit with those uncomfortable questions. Explore different perspectives. And gradually arrive at a moral framework that feels authentic and aligned with your values.
Exactly.
So you got to be patient with yourself.
You do.
Allowing yourself to evolve and change as you explore these new territories of thought and belief.
Exactly, but what about the judgment from others? From family, friends, even the wider Mormon community.
Right.
That can be incredibly isolating.
It can be incredibly painful, especially when those judgments are coming from people you love and respect.
It is.
What do you do?
Well, she offers some really practical advice for dealing with this.
Okay.
Set clear boundaries.
Okay.
Let those people know what's okay and what's not okay to talk about.
Right.
And be willing to walk away from conversations that feel disrespectful or hurtful.
So it's about protecting your own emotional well-being.
Yes.
And not letting others dictate your beliefs or your path.
It's about focusing on building your own little island of sanity.
Right.
In the midst of all that potential chaos and judgment.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And talk about something that can be a major source of anxiety after a faith crisis, particularly for those coming from a Mormon background. Death.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Because if you spent your life believing in a very specific afterlife,
letting
go of those beliefs can be incredibly disorienting.
It can.
And even terrifying.
It can.
It's like your whole framework for understanding life and death gets turned upside down.
Exactly.
So how do you even begin to grapple with that?
Right. What happens to that fear of eternal damnation?
Yeah.
That hope for a celestial reunion with loved ones?
Brittany Hartley, she offers some helpful perspectives on this.
She does.
She encourages people to embrace the mystery,
to
accept that we don't have all the answers, and to find peace and beauty in the unknown. So it's about shifting from that need for certainty to a place of curiosity and acceptance. But what about those big existential questions? What happens after we die? Is there any meaning or purpose to our existence if it all just ends?
She doesn't offer any easy answers, but she encourages people to focus on living a meaningful life in the present moment. Rather than obsessing over what might or might not happen after death. It's about finding joy and purpose in your relationships, your passions, your contributions to the world. Whatever makes life feel rich and vibrant.
It's like that saying, life is a journey, not a destination.
Yes.
Even though that journey might not have the same destination you once believed in. It can still be incredibly meaningful and beautiful.
And she offers this beautiful analogy, comparing life to a dance. It's not about getting to a specific destination. It's about enjoying the movement, the music, the connection, the experience itself. Recognizing that even though the dance will eventually end, the beauty and meaning we create along the way will continue to ripple outwards, touching the lives of others long after we're gone.
That's a powerful image.
It is.
It takes the focus off of that endpoint and puts it back on the present moment.
Yes.
On the experience of living and loving and creating.
Exactly.
But what about the grief and loss that inevitably comes with death? whether it's your own mortality or the passing of a loved one.
Mm-hmm.
How do you cope with that without those old beliefs about an afterlife?
She emphasizes the importance of allowing yourself to feel those emotions fully.
Okay.
Not trying to suppress them or push them away.
Right.
Create that space for grief, sadness, anger, confusion, whatever it is you're feeling.
Yeah.
And find healthy ways to express those emotions,
Okay.
whether it's through talking to a therapist, journaling, spending time in nature,
Right.
or connecting with supportive friends and family members.
So it's about honoring those feelings.
It is.
Allowing yourself to grieve without judgment
Mm-hmm.
and finding those healthy outlets for those emotions.
Yeah, but what about finding ways to remember and honor loved ones who have passed away? How do you do that without those traditional religious rituals and beliefs?
That's tough.
She encourages people to find ways that feel meaningful to them,
Okay.
whether it's through stories, rituals, or simply by living a life that reflects the values and lessons those loved ones taught you.
So it's about keeping those connections alive in your heart,
Exactly.
even in the face of death.
It's about finding those ways to keep their memory alive,
Right.
to honor their legacy,
Yeah.
and to carry those pieces of them with you as you continue on your own journey.
Okay, let's shift gears again and talk about something that's particularly relevant
Okay.
for parents navigating a faith transition.
Yes.
How to talk to your children about it.
Mm-hmm.
This feels like a minefield, honestly.
It is a delicate balance.
How do you balance honesty with protecting them from potentially confusing or upsetting information?
Our sources suggest taking an age-appropriate approach,
Okay.
starting with simple explanations, gradually sharing more information as your children get older,
Right.
and better able to understand.
It's like meeting them where they're at developmentally, not dumping a whole truckload of complex theological arguments on a 5-year-old.
Exactly.
But how do you even begin to explain something as nuanced as a faith transition to a child?
One of the key things is to emphasize that your love and support for them is unwavering,
Okay.
regardless of their beliefs. It's about creating that safe space where they can feel comfortable expressing their own thoughts and feelings
Okay.
without fear of judgment or rejection.
Letting them know that it's okay to have questions.
Right.
It's okay to have doubts.
Yeah,
And it's okay to disagree with you.
absolutely.
That no matter what they believe,
Mm-hmm.
you're still their parent and you still love them unconditionally.
Exactly. And it's also about recognizing that this is an ongoing conversation,
Okay.
not a one-time event.
Right. Because as your children grow and change,
Yeah.
their questions and perspectives will evolve.
Exactly. So it's important to keep those lines of communication open
Right.
and be willing to adapt your approach as needed.
So you got to be flexible, be responsive to their needs,
Yeah.
and be willing to have those conversations over and over again as they process this new information and figure out what it means for them.
Right.
What about those moments when your kids express doubts or even anger
Yeah.
about your faith transition?
That's where those skills of active listening and empathy really come into play.
Well-
It's about validating their feelings, acknowledging their pain,
Yeah.
letting them know that it's okay to feel angry, confused, even betrayed.
It's about allowing them to express those emotions without judgment or defensiveness,
Right.
letting them know that you're there to listen and to support them through those tough moments.
Absolutely.
But what about the potential backlash from other family members or friends
Yeah.
who might not be supportive of your faith transition?
Right.
How do you protect your kids from that?
It's about setting those clear boundaries we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Let those people know what's okay and what's not okay to say around your children.
Right.
Be willing to limit contact or even walk away from situations that feel harmful or disrespectful.
So you're being that buffer,
You are.
that protector for your kids,
Yes.
shielding them from that negativity and judgment.
Exactly.
But what about helping them navigate their own relationships
Yeah.
with those family members or friends
Right.
who might not be supportive?
It's about equipping them with the tools to handle those conversations
Okay.
in a way that feels safe and healthy for them.
So it might involve role-playing different scenarios,
Might.
helping them craft responses to challenging questions,
Mhm.
or simply letting them know that it's okay to disengage from conversations that
Right.
feel uncomfortable or upsetting.
It's about empowering them to advocate for themselves,
Right?
to set their own boundaries,
Yeah.
and to protect their own emotional well-being.
What about those moments when your kids are struggling with their own faith?
Yeah.
What if they're feeling pulled in different directions?
Right.
Or wrestling with doubts and questions of their own?
That's where that same approach of open communication,
Yeah.
non-judgment, and unconditional love comes in.
Okay.
It's about creating that space where they can explore those questions freely,
Right.
without fear of reprisal or pressure to conform.
Letting them know that it's okay to question.
Yes.
It's okay to doubt,
Mm-hmm.
and it's okay to come to their own conclusions.
Absolutely.
Even if those conclusions differ from yours.
Even if they do.
What if they're feeling pressure from other family members or friends
Yeah.
to stay in the church
Right.
or to adhere to certain beliefs or practices?
It's about helping them develop those critical thinking skills to question those messages.
Yeah.
Examine those beliefs, make their own choices based on what feels authentic and true to them.
Empowering them to think for themselves.
Exactly.
To trust their own instincts.
Yeah.
And to resist that pressure to conform or to please others.
Absolutely.
What about those moments when they're feeling lost,
Right.
confused, or even angry about their own faith journey?
It's about validating those feelings.
Right.
Letting them know that it's okay to feel those things
Mm-hmm.
and that you're there to listen and support them through those tough moments.
So you're being that safe harbor,
You are.
that anchor in the midst of that storm of emotions.
Exactly.
Letting them know that they're not alone in this.
And if you're struggling to navigate all of this on your own,
Yeah.
if you're feeling overwhelmed by the challenges of parenting through a faith transition,
Mm-hmm.
don't hesitate to seek outside help.
Okay.
There are therapists,
Right.
support groups,
Yeah.
online communities, specifically for families navigating faith transitions.
It's a good reminder that you don't have to do this alone.
You don't.
There are people who understand what you're going through,
Yeah.
who can offer practical advice,
Mm-hmm.
emotional support,
And a sense of shared experience.
and a sense of shared experience. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about another challenge that can come up after a faith crisis.
Mm-hmm.
That feeling of missing out,
Right.
of FOMO.
Especially when you're leaving a community as tight-knit as the Mormon Church.
Yeah, you might feel like you're missing out on all the social gatherings,
You might.
those shared traditions,
Mhm.
those deep connections that you once had.
Right. And it's easy to fall into the trap of comparing your life
Yeah.
to those who are still active
Right,
in the church.
right. Wondering if they're happier or more fulfilled or simply have it all figured out.
Mm-hmm.
And that can lead to a spiral of envy, resentment, or even regret.
It can.
So how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
How do you move past that feeling of missing out and find contentment in your new life?
Brittany Hartley offers some really helpful perspectives on this.
Okay.
She encourages people to focus on creating a life that's authentic and fulfilling for them,
Okay.
rather than trying to replicate what they've left behind.
So you're not trying to recreate what you had. You're
Right.
trying to create something new.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that your path's going to look different.
And that's okay.
So embrace that difference. Celebrate that uniqueness.
Yes.
Find joy in creating a life that's truly your own,
Exactly.
rather than trying to fit into someone else's mold.
Right.
But what about those moments when you just can't shake that feeling of longing for what you've lost?
Yeah.
You miss those familiar rituals, those shared traditions,
Right.
those deep connections that you once had.
She encourages people to be grateful for what they do have,
Okay.
to appreciate the new experiences and relationships that are coming into their lives,
Right.
and to focus on building those connections that bring them joy and meaning.
So shift your perspective from what you're missing out on
Mm-hmm.
to what you're gaining.
Exactly. Focus on the abundance in your life
Okay.
rather than the scarcity.
Appreciate the new chapters that are unfolding,
Yes.
rather than dwelling on the ones that have closed.
Exactly.
But what about dealing with the guilt and shame that can come with leaving a religion that emphasizes obedience and conformity? Right, that feeling that you've somehow betrayed your family, your community, or even God by choosing to leave.
It's a heavy burden to carry.
It is.
So how do you navigate those feelings?
Brittany Hartley offers some really helpful advice on how to navigate those feelings.
Okay.
She encourages people to practice self-compassion,
Okay.
to remind themselves that they're not bad or wrong
Right.
for making a choice that feels right for them.
Okay.
It's about giving yourself permission to let go of those old beliefs and to embrace your own truth.
Okay. Recognizing that you are worthy of love and acceptance.
Yes.
Regardless of your beliefs.
Exactly.
How do you silence that inner critic that keeps telling you you've done something wrong?
She emphasizes the importance of finding ways to forgive yourself. It's about letting go of that self-judgment
Right.
and embracing yourself with kindness and compassion.
Okay. Recognizing that you made the best choices you could with the information that you had at the time.
Right.
And that you're allowed to evolve and change, even if it means leaving behind beliefs and practices that no longer serve you.
Exactly.
But what about dealing with those moments when you start to question your own decision? Those old doubts and fears resurface.
Yeah.
And you wonder if you made the right choice.
She encourages people to view those moments as opportunities for growth.
Okay.
Rather than setbacks.
Right.
It's about recognizing that doubt is a natural part of the human experience.
Okay.
And it doesn't mean you've made a mistake or that you're going backward.
So reframe those moments of doubt as opportunities for reflection.
Yes.
And reaffirmation. Use those moments to check in with yourself. Examine your beliefs. And make sure you're still on a path that feels authentic and aligned with your values.
Absolutely.
But what about those times when those doubts feel overwhelming?
Yeah.
What if you start to feel tempted to go back to what's familiar?
Right.
Even if you know deep down that it's not right for you anymore.
That's when it's so important to lean on your support system, to reach out to those who understand what you're going through, and to remind yourself why you made the choices you did.
So it's about anchoring yourself to that inner compass.
Yes.
That sense of self that you've worked so hard to cultivate.
Exactly.
Reminding yourself that you're not going back.
Right.
You're moving forward. Even if the path ahead feels uncertain at times.
Absolutely.
But what about dealing with the anger and resentment that can come with feeling like you've been lied to or misled?
Yeah.
Especially when you've dedicated so much of your life to a belief system that turns out to be, well, not what you thought it was.
That's a valid response.
Yeah.
It's natural to feel angry and betrayed when something you've held so dear turns out to be different than what you were taught.
Yeah.
And Brittany Hartley encourages people to allow themselves to feel that anger.
Okay.
Not try to suppress it or push it away.
Acknowledge those feelings.
Right.
Give yourself permission to be angry.
Yes.
And find healthy ways to express that anger.
Exactly. But what are some healthy ways to express anger without hurting yourself or others?
Yeah.
She suggests journaling, talking to a therapist, engaging in physical activity, or finding creative outlets for those emotions.
To channel that anger into something productive.
Exactly.
Rather than letting it fester and poison your well-being.
Right.
But what about the anger that's directed at specific individuals or institutions? The resentment you might feel towards those who you believe misled you or kept information from you.
She encourages people to explore the roots of that anger.
Okay.
To try to understand where it's coming from and what needs it might be masking. Because sometimes that anger can be a sign that you're grieving the loss of something important.
Okay.
Like your sense of identity, your community, or even your belief in a higher power.
So look beneath the surface of that anger.
Yes.
Understand the deeper emotions that might be fueling it. And find ways to process those emotions in a healthy and constructive way.
Exactly.
But what about the fear of the unknown?
Right.
That feeling of stepping out of a familiar structure into a vast and undefined world.
That's a common fear, especially when you're transitioning away from a belief system that offered a very clear and defined worldview.
Right.
And Brittany Hartley offers some really helpful advice on how to navigate that fear.
Yeah.
She encourages people to view it as an opportunity for growth and discovery.
Okay.
A chance to explore new ideas and perspectives and to create a worldview that's truly their own.
So embrace that uncertainty.
Yeah.
That open-endedness. See it as a chance to learn, to grow, to create something new and beautiful.
Exactly.
But how do you do that when that fear feels so overwhelming?
Right.
How do you find the courage to step into the unknown?
She encourages people to find comfort in the things that are constant and unchanging, like the laws of nature, the beauty of the natural world, or the love and support of those closest to you.
So find those anchors.
Yes.
That can ground you in times of uncertainty.
Exactly. Remembering that even though everything might feel like it's shifting around you, there are still those core elements of your life that remain constant and true.
Right. And you're not alone in this.
You're not.
There are countless others who have navigated similar transitions.
Yeah.
And come out on the other side.
And those shared experiences can be incredibly validating and empowering.
It's a reminder that you're part of a larger human story.
Yeah.
A story of seeking, of questioning,
of evolving,
and ultimately finding your own unique path.
Absolutely.
And that's a pretty powerful thing to be a part of.
It is.
It's a reminder that even though this journey can be challenging,
it
can also be incredibly rewarding.
It can.
It's a chance to rediscover yourself, to redefine your values, to create a life that feels truly authentic and fulfilling.
Okay, I'm feeling a bit more hopeful now. Right.
What two?
Like maybe this whole process of deconstructing and rebuilding isn't just about loss and uncertainty,
Right.
but also about growth and possibility.
Absolutely. But what about finding joy and meaning in the everyday?
Yeah.
How do you do that when you've spent years focused on a future reward or a heavenly afterlife?
That's a great question. And Brittany Hartley argues that true joy and meaning are found in the everyday moments,
Okay.
in the simple things, in the
Yeah.
connections we make, in the beauty we experience,
Okay.
in the contributions we make to the world.
Right.
It's about shifting our focus from what we lack to what we have,
Okay.
from what we're striving for to what we're already experiencing.
Recalibrate your perspective.
Yes.
Shift your focus from that distant horizon to the richness of the present moment.
Exactly.
But how do you do that? How do you train yourself to see the world through that lens of gratitude and presence?
She encourages people to practice mindfulness,
Okay.
to pay attention to their senses, to savor those small pleasures. Train yourself to see the world through a lens of wonder and appreciation.
Slow down.
Right.
Be present. Really notice those little details.
Those little details that we often take for granted. It's about finding those sparks of joy in the everyday moments.
It is.
Those moments of connection, those glimpses of beauty that make life feel rich and meaningful.
Exactly. And it's also about connecting with your passions.
Okay.
Pursuing those activities that bring you joy, make you feel alive.
Right.
Whether it's art, music, writing, travel, sports, activism,
Correct.
whatever it is that sparks your curiosity and lights you up.
Infuse your life with those things that make your heart sing.
Yeah.
Those activities that make you feel energized and engaged.
Exactly.
But what about those times when life just feels hard?
When you're struggling with those big questions,
Yeah.
when you're feeling lost or alone,
Right.
what about those moments when joy feels elusive?
That's when it's so important to focus on building meaningful relationships,
Okay.
to nurture those connections that bring joy and support into your lives.
Yeah?
Because those relationships can be a powerful source of strength and resilience.
We're not meant to go through this alone.
We're not.
We need those people
Yeah.
who see us, understand us,
And support us.
and support us, especially during those challenging times.
Especially during those times.
And it's not just about receiving support.
Right.
It's about giving it to, offering a listening ear, a helping hand,
A kind word.
a kind word. It's about creating those circles of connection and support that lift us all up.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into life after a faith crisis, what final thoughts do you want to leave our listeners with?
I want to remind everyone that even amidst the pain and uncertainty of a faith crisis, there is hope.
I love that. Hope for what?
Hope for healing, hope for growth. Hope for a life that is truly your own. A life filled with meaning and purpose, even if that purpose looks different than what you once imagined.
It sounds like even though going through a faith transition can be so difficult, it can also be a catalyst for some really profound personal growth. You know, it kind of pushes you to examine your beliefs, your values,
Right.
your whole sense of self.
Yeah, it's like you're stripping away all these layers of
Yeah.
conditioning and societal expectations to uncover your authentic self.
And that can be so liberating, but also so disorienting at the same time.
That's
Especially when you're also navigating the impact of this shift on your relationships,
right.
your family, your whole social network.
It's not something you go through in isolation.
Yeah, and one of the most powerful things I think about these stories is how they highlight the importance of human connection.
Yeah.
You know, even when you're questioning everything, even when you feel completely lost,
Right.
just finding those people who understand and support you can make all the difference.
It's like that sense of belonging gives you a lifeline.
Yeah.
That grounding
Right.
when everything else feels really shaky.
But how do you cultivate those connections?
Right.
Especially if you've distanced yourself from your former community or you're struggling to find your place within it.
I think it starts with being honest with yourself about what you need.
Okay.
Maybe you need a space to vent, to process your anger and grief. Maybe you need someone to listen without judgment. Someone who gets it.
Right.
Someone who understands what it's like to question your faith.
Or maybe you just need someone to grab a coffee with
Yeah.
and talk about something other than religion.
Right.
To remind yourself, there's a whole world out there beyond the confines of your former beliefs.
Exactly. And there are so many ways to find those connections.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to reach out to people you trust, even if you haven't spoken to them in a while.
Right.
Let them know what you're going through and just see if they're open to listening.
And if your old friends and family aren't receptive, that's okay too. You're not obligated to stay in relationships that are no longer serving you.
Right. Sometimes you have to create space for those new connections.
Yeah.
Those relationships that are built on mutual respect and understanding.
Right, and that's where exploring new communities can be so valuable.
It can be.
You mentioned groups like Mormon Stories and Thrive Beyond Religion earlier.
I did.
Those are great resources for people who have left the church or are considering leaving.
They are.
What about those who want to stay,
Yeah.
but are struggling to find their place within a system that can feel very rigid and unforgiving?
That's a valid struggle. The
Mm.
church can feel like a very black and white environment.
Yeah,
And if you're grappling with those nuanced beliefs or doubts, it can feel really isolating.
it can.
But there are communities and resources out there for those who identify as nuanced or progressive Mormons.
Okay, where can people find those communities?
Online platforms like Facebook and Reddit can be good starting points.
Okay.
There are groups specifically for nuanced and progressive Mormons where people can share their experiences, connect with others who understand what they're going through.
It's like creating a safe space within the larger Mormon community, a place where you can be authentic without fear of judgment or rejection.
Exactly. And there are also organizations like Affirmation, LGBTQ Mormons, Families and Friends
Okay.
that provide support and advocacy for LGBTQ individuals within the church.
It's a reminder that you don't have to fit into a specific mold to be Mormon. There's room for diversity of thought and belief within the faith,
There is.
even if it doesn't always feel that way.
And ultimately, it's about finding a way to live in truth, to align your actions and your beliefs with your deepest sense of self.
Right.
That might mean staying in the church and working to make it a more inclusive and welcoming space.
Yeah.
Or it might mean stepping away from the church altogether and creating a new spiritual path that resonates with your values.
So whether you choose to stay or leave, the key is to find a way to live authentically,
Exactly.
to honor your own journey and your own truth.
And to remember that joy and meaning aren't destinations, they're practices.
Yeah.
They're choices we make every day, even when things are tough.
Right.
They're found in those small moments of connection, of gratitude, of beauty, even amidst the pain and uncertainty of life.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into life after a faith crisis,
Yeah.
what final words of encouragement would you offer our listeners who are navigating this complex and often painful journey?
First and foremost, be kind to yourself. Give yourself grace. This is a process, not a race. There's no right or wrong way to do this.
I love that grace over guilt, always. What else?
Don't be afraid to ask for help. Talk to a therapist, join a support group, reach out to trusted friends and family members. You don't have to go through this alone.
There's strength in vulnerability, right?
There is.
And sometimes we all need a little extra support to navigate those rough patches. What else?
Remember that you are worthy of love and belonging just as you are right now in this moment. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to prove it. You simply are. And you are not broken. You are not damaged. You are not a failure.
You are human.
You are.
And being human means embracing the full spectrum of our experiences.
It does.
The light and the shadow, the joy and the sorrow, the doubt and the faith.
Exactly. Embrace it all. Be curious, be open, be kind, and trust that even amidst the uncertainty, there is beauty and meaning to be found.
It's been an incredible journey exploring these stories with you. Thank you for sharing your insights and wisdom with our listeners. I hope they feel empowered to continue their own journey of healing, growth, and self-discovery wherever that path may lead.
If you find value in this exploration, please like, share, follow, and consider becoming a subscriber. Your contributions help keep these conversations going and allows us to maintain the highest quality production. You can find all the details at studyfaithwithai.com. Thank you for being part of this journey.